And the ancestors of Totoro, the ancient gods, can't live in this kind of forest. They were really born out of the primordial forests. So, the result of what Okoto described as smaller and stupid is that Totoro, who comes out in the movie, he's only 2 meters tall and can't speak a human language even though he's a god. So this is the actual outcome of how the ancient gods ends up after Okoto says, "We will die out soon. We're growing smaller and we're growing stupid." But instead, they learned to coexist with humans. Specifically, they started eating acorns and living quietly in sacred shrine forests near the outskirts of the countryside, and learned to make pottery from the Jomon people and spinning tops from children in the Edo period. So they learned to live in the shadows. That's why I assume that as a result of the Great War 700 years ago, which I call the Great Mononoke War, the descendants of the ones who were defeated still live quietly all over Japan, like Totoro in Tokorozawa City. So he's kind of like American Indians who were exterminated by Westerners. He's similar to that kind of indigenous people who lives hiding from the Yayoi people like us who grow rice. So once again, let me quote producer Suzuki's words in the volume of Ghibli's textbook, The Wind Rises. He said, "Miyazaki-san and I originally had this delusion about Totoro. There were many Totoro tribes in this world. They were destroyed after fighting humanity, but survivors appear in various times, such as Mononoke in the Middle Ages, Ghost in the Edo period, and now Totoro. So Totoro carries such a history on his shoulder. It's not just a cute creature, it also contains fear." Miyazaki set this backstory, but kept it hidden for the movie that was targeted for children. But that was not enough for him, so after 10 years, he couldn't bear it anymore, and that's how he ended up making Princess Mononoke. So it's kind of opposite of Star Wars, or should I say it's the same. He first depicted how the story ends, and then he depicted why things happened the way they happened. So My Neighbor Totoro is actually the sequel of Princess Mononoke. And Miyazaki was really going to stop at My Neighbor Totoro, but he couldn't help. Then why couldn't he? Well, many texts have written about how Miyazaki became more and more obsessed with researching such fields as agriculture during the Jomon period, culture theory and lore of forest, and so on. That's why he couldn't help telling a story about them. He made Princess Mononoke because he couldn't hide the history which he had in My Neighbor Totoro. Actually, My Neighbor Totoro is related to another work. Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind depicts an era where humans live quietly hiding from giant gods. Then Princess Mononoke depicts humans destroying giant gods. And My Neighbor Totoro depicts a relationship between human children and a god whose ancestors were once gigantic but has become incomparably small as mankind prospered. So in fact, Miyazaki's works create an interconnected cycle, and so are these 3 works. But why couldn't Miyazaki stop after making My Neighbor Totoro? Why did he need to give it prequels? Originally, Miyazaki said that Studio Ghibli would be dissolved after My Neighbor Totoro was completed. He thought it was natural for a studio to dissolve after making 3 works because that's how many one studio could make. That's why he said that Studio Ghibli could dissolve after making My Neighbor Totoro. However, a life-shaking incident for Miyazaki happened at the same time as the release of My Neighbor Totoro, which was the release of Grave of the Fireflies that came out with Totoro. Thanks to this, Miyazaki had to take back his word that he had done everything he wanted to do. He'd really said, after I'm done with My Neighbor Totoro, there's nothing more that I wanted to depict, so I will go back to animator position. But Grave of the Firefly came out and it was a nightmare and it traumatized Miyazaki, and as a result Miyazaki continued to make more animes. I still haven't touched on the deep theme inside the story nor about the characters. In the second half, I will talk about this nightmare Miyazaki had and discuss how My Neighbor Totoro was made logically to maximum degree and how it's got such beautiful structure. Now, this is it for the free part, so let's do the questionnaire. Isn't this cool? The formation of Japanese islands from 20,000 to 6,000 years ago is just so fun that I can stare at it all day. Sorry, I know the explanation got a little complicated.